Yeah, good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here with the Power to Fly team again. I absolutely enjoy being a part of the topics that you all host. It's amazing. I feel it's very important. As for the bio, you did a great job. I mean, it could be a little bit longer, I guess, but we don't. I would just want to shorten everything into 1 to 3, 1 minute or less. So,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
the
What's your tight
elevator
one
speech.
minute? Exactly,
Perfect.
exactly. Well, so glad you're here. So let's jump right in. So we're going to talk about, the celebration of intersectionality. And so if you could set the tone for the day, like I was saying, could you just, for what that means to you, can you define what intersectionality means?
Yeah, absolutely. Surprisingly or not, it's something I've actually dealt with. I'm being raised in a interrace family that I had to deal with growing up for a period of time that I actually had to look into, and I didn't realize. To be completely honest, before I got into this field, I didn't realize how important it was.
Mm,
It was either growing up, it was either I was Puerto Rican or I was white, just by the base way I looked or my skin tone. And as
mm,
I grew older, I just realized how important it was for me to accept everything inside of me, not just the way that I look, not just my accent, not just the way that I sound, but I needed to accept everything from my mom's side and my father's side, everything that makes up every part of my DNA and coding. And once I've learned to do that, I realized how important it was for me to really encourage others to do
mm.
the same. Because some will say, yes, I love being a female, but I don't like my skin color, not realizing that they just chopped a piece of themselves off. One of the things I love to look at it is my mom loves to do puzzles. So count me out of that, but she loves it. So, but one of the things, but it helps me really focus on intersectionality because if you really picture a puzzle and every piece that goes in to make that whole puzzle, then you can realize like once the puzzle is complete, you have yourself, so to speak. So you put the
Mm.
religion in there, you put the race in there, put the skin color, your background in there. Every piece of the puzzle makes up who you are. So as you grow and you move and learn more about it, you're able to really accept the you yourself honestly, and that's where it has to start, and that's where it started for me, and why it's so important for me is because I had to learn to accept all of me and not just part of me.
Oh gosh, thank you for that. I love that so much. And I love the visual, this like personal identification with the puzzle that you brought in with your mother. It's so sweet because that's actually funny. Joshua and I were talking for a second in the green room. I was like, oh, my sister lives where you live. And they are actually obsessed with puzzles, like they're kids and they're adults. It's like a whole thing. So the synergy is happening here. And again, I'm like, cool, you do you. I will
Right.
read you a book. I don't like puzzles, but I think it's a beautiful idea. And I love that too, because it is like this, like it takes a little bit of like mental power, right?
Right.
Like you said, you needed to do some like research and investigating and then like putting it all together. And it can be like sometimes the pieces don't fit, even though maybe they fits over here. And I just
Yeah.
love that visual. That's really, really wonderful.
Yeah, it's just something it helps. I don't retain everything so easily, so I find the easiest way to retain, but also not just to retain it, but also to be able to regurgitate it. I can't speak today because I'm the first one this morning,
Good
but
morning.
but it's also it helped me in my learning development training as well, because it helped me be able to simplify for others that may be in the same predicament as me or even less, and it also helps me have these conversations with younger generations like my nephews and things of that nature. So I try to simplify as much as possible.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, I love that because it's easy to get swept up in like jargon and and maybe there's also some like because we're talking about intersectionality, there might be like um like parts of like language and cultures that don't necessarily translate sometimes and like need translation. Whereas when you're talking in a more like general way, these like identifications that we can have and bring us closer together and help ourselves bring ourselves closer together as well.
Absolutely.
You mentioned some of your training, and I'd actually love to hear a little bit about that if you're willing to share. Just like, oh, when you're training, like, what does that look like, and how can people seek that out if they're interested in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, to be completely honest, I had a very hard time learning growing up, and a lot of teachers, I guess, didn't understand that I was more of a hands-on learner. And I guess most
Mm,
teachers don't take the test to figure out what type of learning there is within their students. I don't know the process, but when I was growing up, it was completely different. Not that I'm that old, but I'm just saying.
no, I think
um,
we're of that same generation where they're just like, and we'll just kind of, you figure it out.
Right. And it took a lot for me to completely understand. When I actually did my first training, I bombed it. I'm not gonna lie to nobody. I bombed because I did what I was, what was basically what my environment creative. But as I, you know, got underneath people that knew what they were doing, I just continued to take and take from people and continuously just to realize that I have to once again simplify it to make sure that it comes down. So, and I also not only simplify, but I make it engaging. And also on top of engaging, I make it fun because I don't want to sit there and be in a room and have someone talk at me all day. And I take what the things that I don't like and I incorporate that in training because I understand that there are some people that can do that talk phrase. There are people that need hands-on. There's a different variations of how people learn. And I basically, within my training, I basically incorporate all of that in one sit-in so that everybody's included, because of course inclusion is very important. And honestly, if anyone's interested, my LinkedIn page is up. I'm in the process of updating it, but feel free to reach out, send me a private message. We can definitely discuss any type of the trainings. I have done unconscious bias. I have done lunch and learns around cultural events. I mean, you name it, I've probably done it without even realizing it. Definitely big on leadership training, because I really feel that's where it starts. Definitely do a lot of C-suite training because that's where the power is. That's where that's where you want the yes to come from, because it always starts from the top and trickles down. So I'm also an ERG leader. So it just also helps bring in those type of groups within companies that may not have them, because that gives the employees a voice to speak up and also protects them without retaliation.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, you and I we could have a whole other 30-minute conversation just on ERGs and how important they are, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Call me. I'll show up for that one too.
Yes, please bring Joshua back, everyone. Do you hear me, Power to Fly? Bring them back again. So you did mention, you talked about the I in D and I in B, which is inclusion, but it also, for our topic, can be intersectionality. So if you'd love to, I'd love to hear about, this is a large, broad question. If, please pardon my broad questions, but, we got 30 minutes. What are some of the intersections in the Latinx community? And maybe if you want to speak to the ones that you have experience with versus the ones that you help train and bring together.
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I grew up in a very diverse household. I call my parents hippies, even though they're not.
I think you and I have more in common by the second. I'm just like, what? You have hippies in New York. I had hippies in California.
Yeah, I just say that because nobody understands where my family comes from. My father is from Puerto Rico. His complexion can be misconstrued as African-American because he has a very dark complexion. So that was extremely hard to grow up with. My mom is European and very mixed. We call her a mutt. But we gotta love him. So
I'm sure she loves that.
Oh, of course, she's the one who taught me the name. So, and growing up in that, I mean, I actually had to learn. Like I said, intersectionality was something very new to me because it's not something that was thrown around growing up. It's either you're mixed. They'll say the term mixed, or half breed, or they'll call all these other types of names, but intersectionalities they'll never use. And part of that I have found within that it was gender. Of course, it was my sex, race, ethnicity, class, religion. And consider my mom was Methodist, my father was Catholic. That was already an issue there. So I mean, the list can go on. So I had a lot to comb through to really identify, to put that piece of the put those pieces to the puzzle together.
Good morning.
Which took a while. Mind you, side note, I won't be the first one next time. But
we're going to do a 30-minute green room session first to warm up, and we'll get all giggles out and do that.
But being personable is very important too. So that's why I love Power to Fly, because they make these conversations so personable, entertaining, and educating. And I love it. One of the things about intersectionality, though, just going back, is once you're able to identify where you're at and be able to realize them, and let's say open your lens. And once you open your eyes or open the door, however you want to put it through, and you walk through it, now you have an obligation because now you're recognizing the factor of what's inside of you and what's inside of everybody you come in contact with. And it's your obligation to make sure that you are honoring each and every part of that person as you meet them. Because you can't meet somebody and say, oh, well, nice to meet you, Hunter. I don't, it's nice to meet you, Hunter. And I can immediately assume that you're Caucasian by the assumption because I'm seeing you. But what happens to the rest of your identity? What happens,
Right.
what happens to everything else that comes with you? Am I just talking to Hunter because you're Caucasian, or am I talking to you because you work for Power to Fly? There's a lot of things. So it's like, for me, I'm very mindful, which is another training I do is mindfulness, is because this takes place within that, just to basically help individuals accept all of the person and not just part of the person.
Yeah, because it, like you're saying, like there's so much, the old adage, right? Like the book and the cover, right? And there's so much unconscious bias that can just be firing automatically because that's just what's happened. That's what my brain is trying to do. It's like you said, it's putting pieces together of the puzzle, but it's missing a lot of the pieces because it's only going on maybe this tiny little corner of the puzzle, right?
Which is mixed in the bigger picture. Now you have a visual of how my puzzle used to end up.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so we are like talking about, I love that too. Like, we're talking about, why am I talking to this person? How am I showing up with this person based off of this limited information that I have? And so that can show up, we just touched on like unconscious bias. So that can show up as like privilege that sometimes shows up within intersectionality. And also there can be barriers depending on how you show up for people and how people are perceiving you based off these little things. So can you touch on, or rather these visual things, perhaps, not little. So perhaps maybe you could share with us like maybe what some of those privileges and barriers are depending on who's showing up and who's on the other side of the table, perhaps.
Yeah, as for the who, I really can't speak to the who because it really depends on the environment you walk into. But I can definitely speak to, as for a privilege, for me personally, I think intersectionality provides a lens through which we can examine the processes, practices, policies, and structures. So it basically—
Wait, slow down. Say that again. There's some gold here, Joshua. I'm not going to let you just breeze through like the key points.
I told you I cheated a little bit. I made myself a cheat sheet.
I was like, no. You got to slow that down for me. Say that again.
Absolutely. So it goes back to that lens factor because your eyes are open. So it provides us the ability to just look through the lens that we can examine the processes of everything you're going through, whether you're in school, work, wherever your environment is. It allows you to really examine the processes, the practices, the policies, depending on where you're at, and structures that increase risks of people, employees, and students experiencing disadvantage or discrimination.
Yes, PPPS. It's
there
like
we go.
The end of a letter. PPPS.
PPPS.
You gotta look at these policies.
All of it.
Yeah.
Because I mean, sometimes, when I was working within my particular corporate America job, as one of the main things I looked at was the policies and procedures, because that affects me as an individual.
Yes.
And if it affects me, I can only imagine that it's affecting my counterparts, or it's affecting my female counterparts, or it's gonna affect somebody else that I'm either close to, I'm related to, or friendship with, or have something to do with. And one of the main things of my personal mission is definitely to make sure that I advocate for those that may not have a voice, those that may be able to speak up, those that may be fearful of retaliation, those that may had a bad experience within a previous job that'll just sit there and just take the abuse or whatever it is at the time that they're dealing with. And I just don't feel that's fair. So of course, it just gives me that voice, that much encouragement to continue speaking up.
It's so important because if there's that, like you're saying, if there's that retaliation, then people, my experience at least, it too, and just like in any environment, you and I have very different experiences, but if I feel any sort of retaliation for speaking what is hard for me, I want to clam up, and I'm like, okay, now I'm just going to try to be invisible.
Yeah. You just shut down and just do what you need to do. And that brings me to the barrier aspect of your question. And it is that retaliation aspect, the uncomfortability, the shutting down, the showing up and just trying to be invisible. All those are considered barriers because now the individual no longer feels comfortable in their space or their environment, wherever they are going, because they're not being fully acknowledged.
Yeah. Yeah. And then they, like you said, they just want to show up and do the work at hand and probably be quietly miserable.
Which I know a lot of people doing that now, unfortunately.
Yeah. Unfortunately so. So what are some of the things that, when you're training potentially folks that are on the higher ups, right, to be like, here's the things do not do, what do you tell them to do to help encourage folks? You mentioned ERGs. What are some of the other things that you do with some of the companies that to help create these safe spaces for folks to be able to speak freely and comfortably and share maybe something that is hard for somebody to hear, but is really important?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a great question. When I saw that one there, I was like, yes, let me just get going. But honestly, it's also the ability goes into promoting. If you want to talk about a work environment, and one of the main things that I tell the people that I work with, especially in C-suite, is first and foremost, recognize the individual and all their identities. Because it's great to say, I see you, I see this, but you never understand if they say something else, they may have a negative connotation or something towards that. So recognize them. I'm not saying, of course we want to accept everyone where they're at, but I'm just saying recognize the individual identities. Then after recognizing them, you want to start capturing the data to improve the intersectionality. You don't want to just sit there and recognize and say, okay, well, thanks. It's nice. Thanks having a conversation. I recognize that you have a full puzzle in you, but let's just pull out the data-driven part of you, No, let's go ahead and work together and capture that data. However your company does that, let's capture the data to improve the intersectionality. Then after we capture it, you want to create a culture of acknowledgement and understanding. And that's, I think, the acknowledgement part is the most important thing here, because you're not only acknowledging the individual. Once you acknowledge that individual, it's then going to just bleed down to the rest of the company, organization, school, wherever you're at. One of the other things is capture the diversity thought. Intersectionality is really about diverse. We are all diverse within ourselves, considering everything that makes us up, our DNA marks, our race, our ethnicity, everything is. So you want to make sure you're capturing. After you accept it all, just capture everything. And with that diversity thought of, okay, well, clearly there's someone in front of me that comes from a highly diverse background. What else do we need to do? What are the next steps? And this is not an overnight deal. There's companies out there that has over 5,000 employees. So this is not an overnight, this is progress, but at least this is going to show a company or someone or somewhere is taking the initiative that they want to change. And that's the most important thing, is that they want to change. Right. And then also help leader. One of my other things is it's great to talk about intersectionality. It's great to throw the word out there. But if you're in a room full of people, you don't know how many people actually know what intersectionality is. So help leaders understand what intersectionality is. Take a journey with them. Hold their hand if you have to. If the group is too big, break it down to like multiple meetings or multiple groups. Definitely, or what I say, lunch and learns, but definitely just break it down to make it a little bit more understanding for that particular leader, or do or send out an anonymous survey, because honestly, what I've learned in a leadership situation, most people aren't going to raise their hand and admit that they don't know what intersectionality is, in fear of not being made fun of, but just in fear of just looking bad in front of their colleagues. So send out an anonymous survey to help those particular leaders to see who really understood what you're presenting. And then maybe those who want additional help or additional understanding, create a whole separate thing for them and invite them to that training, meeting, lunch and learn, whatever that may be. And then, of course, continue to educate colleagues. Education is key here. Most of what I know was not taught to me. Most of what I know is basically Googling a word, Googling a topic, a lot of the trainings I did on LinkedIn Learning. They've helped a lot. Some of my mentors, it's helped me a lot watching them deliver some of these heavy topics or hard topics sometimes. And anything that I learn, I either pass on or I create something to simplify it and then pass it on to my colleagues, my friends, my family. I make sure everyone stays in the loop, because if I believe in this or stand for this, I want to definitely, I don't pressure anybody, but I definitely encourage my circle to do the same.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful how you expand your circle, whether it's your work or your family or your friends, that it's all of you. It's that, going to go back to the theme here of the puzzle. It's like there's your work life and there's your family life and your friends life, and you want to bring your whole self to all of those things, right? Because I think it's easy to compartmentalize, like, oh, at work I show up like this, and of course we need to be professional, but that's different than like bottling up parts of our identity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the misconstrued societal curses that we actually deal with, is that we feel, I think people forget that we spend 8 hours of our day at work. That's majority of our day. And we spend a lot of it with coworkers, bosses, leaders. If we show up stiff and sterile every day, that kind of defeats your personality and you as an individual. And it kind of makes you sit there and really rethink of who you are. And it can cause some conflict because you're being this way at work. And then when you come home, you're being a completely different way. And it's like, well, how are you honoring yourself? How are you really including, anything of yourself or anything of that, the intersections I like to call them, is how are you honoring any of those particular things in your life? You're denying a part of yourself, just of 8 hours a day of every day, just to be someone that I don't really feel most people are comfortable being.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were mentioned earlier about the importance of how to create these, environments where people feel safe. And you were talking about the, anonymous surveys is one thing you can do. And we had a comment from Linda in the chat here that said safety is number one. And there's very little organizations that center safety in their culture. Without safety, employees don't feel that they can't speak. Oops, sorry, I just moved. Can't speak up without consequences. So it's so important to here's someone's firsthand experience, that if they don't feel safe, the employees don't want to share, right?
Absolutely. And it's honestly, that is great. And thank you so much for bringing that up, Linda, because that is great, honestly, because that's one of the biggest things that I struggled with. And, one of the things is, and that's why the ERG groups are so important, whether it's committees, whether it's, the ERG group, however you want it to be. But I definitely agree. If you have an amount of people you trust, I would say start meeting with them first. If you have a manager or boss that you trust and know that has your back and really supports you, invite them to a meeting, and then just continue letting it grow from there, because then all you're able to do is definitely write a proposal, and that proposal include everything you feel is needed. And then, like, depend on the company. And of course, nowadays, because DEIBC is so important right now, most companies are not going to turn you away, because unfortunately, there's a lot of companies that just want to check a box. And there's other companies that actually want to make sure that change applies. So depending on where you're at and what company you're in, that really just, you have to feel it out and see what you're able to do. But definitely strength in numbers are definitely important. When I launched the DEI committee before, the ERG, when I launched the DI committee at my previous job, it wasn't so much as easy because we started in person and we had probably about 5 people, no leadership, management, and it made it complicated because we had no budget. We had nothing really to do. So of course it dissipated, it died basically, and then was relaunched. And then when it was relaunched, it was kind of more involved. So once it was more involved, because we had a little bit more of attention, we kind of shook the company a little bit. And then of course, the whole DEI flag started running. So they had no, I guess they didn't really have a choice but to say, hey, we're here and give us the support we needed.
Oh, that's so important. We got another comment too about, and you mentioned too, like working with the C-suite folks, because they set the tone for how everyone is treated, and what you were just talking to for, and how we show up for each other is support and resources for these things like the ERGs. If there's no budget, there's like the companies need to provide these things. And a lot of them we have to teach them that's like, we need these resources.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and one of those main things is, I think that was probably the hardest challenge, which I took on gladly, was really getting the C-suite involved. Like having someone show up is great. Don't get me wrong. That you're planting a seed. But the bigger thing is besides just planting the seed, now we have to continue watering it. So the more that you actually invite them, the more that they come along, the more that you engage them, the more you have one-on-ones with whoever your C-suite sponsor is, the more they start to see the change, they start to see the value, they start to see the company needs in the DEI or whatever the group is that you decide to start. They start to see a lot of it. And then the more employees that show up, the more you're able to, I guess, get stand-ins for it or support for it.
So we have just a couple minutes left here, Joshua. This has been so wonderful chatting with you. Before we wrap up, can you, maybe share with us why and how, intersectionality can be celebrated in, in our lives and in the workplace?
Absolutely. Sorry if you hear background noises.
That's okay. We're all working from home,
Right, all of us,
we do it.
It goes back. I see there was one about what is professional. I'm sorry, I just had to derail it for what is professional nowadays. I don't know.
It's a great question, Ronnie. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Ronnie, because everyone works from home, so everyone has a different definition for it. But if you are back at the office, I guess, professional is just key to what the company wants it to be at that point. But as for celebrating, I just really think overall to celebrate it in a company aspect is really go back to those the points I mentioned earlier. It's not just for C-suites, for the entire company, but first and foremost, to celebrate at work, it has to be acknowledged. It definitely has to be acknowledged. Without the acknowledgement, you really can't get across the threshold there. It's nice for people to sit there and, like I said, mentioned earlier, throw the word around. But if people don't really know what that means, what it looks like, how to really teach or understand it, then you're going to be at a wall. So the best thing is acknowledgement. And from acknowledgement then becomes education. And then it gives you the ability to really open up that door for celebration. And a celebration can either be an event of somewhat of part of having employees speak up. Like you can reach out to employees if there's a DEI manager or leader in the company, have them reach out to employees to see who's able to speak up on a topic, who's experienced good experiences versus bad experience, really just tone in. I think the bigger thing is if within your company that you have someone speaking up for this particular topic, definitely utilize them and their group and their value, because the more you use internal value, the better the employees definitely feel, and they feel they're being heard.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joshua. So this has been so great. Please come back again. We would love to have you back, as we, there's so many different roads we could take, and we could have 30-minute conversation about this, 30 conversation about that. Thank you for jumping in and kicking us off this morning about intersectionality. How can folks stay connected with you? You mentioned your LinkedIn. Is that the best way to reach out and continue the conversation?
Yeah, as of right now, LinkedIn would definitely be the best place. Again, it's mixed Joshua Rosario King. It's also on my profile, Power to Fly. Feel free to inbox me. I'm in the process of updating a lot of my information while I'm in transition, but that'd be the best way to contact me if anyone's interested in questions, further conversation, or any type of trainings, lunch and learns, or anything else I can assist with.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you, Joshua. Enjoy the beach.
Thank you so much.
Have fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hunter. Talk to you later.
I'll talk to you later. Thanks for being here.